All right, grab your favorite mug. It's time for Coffee with Your Retirement Coach. Welcome back to Coffee with Your Retirement Coach. Today, I guess I'm behind the clipboard, but I'm with your coaches, Randy Yeomans.
How you doing, Aaron?
Nick Yeomans.
Hey, hello.
Today, we want to talk about Roth, but specifically from the point that you did the disciplined thing. You contributed to the work plan, and you did it with your after-tax dollars. Well, what about when it gets time to use it or close to using it? How do we do qualified distributions, and how do we do successful rollovers? Nick, is this, am I making a big deal out of nothing?
No, Aaron, I'm so glad that we're talking about this today. You know, if we were talking about this, Randy, 10, 12, 13 years ago, this really wasn't a huge, point of, even having a conversation about, because there were more limited numbers of employer plans offering 401ks with Roth options. And even those that were including the Roth option, employees were not quick to adapt that part of their plan. So they weren't just making more and more contributions towards the Roth. They were just continuing to do what they were doing before tax. Today, you and I are seeing more and more Roth 401ks with pretty significant balances, wouldn't you say?
I'm very substantial. A matter of fact, I've been surprised a few times that people heard our message about the power of the Roth, and now they're 5 and 10 years into it, and they're pulling up their balances, and the amount of money that they have in Roth is unbelievable. And, tax-free is a pretty good way to go. So, but it takes a little bit of guts sometimes to decide I'll pay the tax on the seed and I'm going to take the harvest tax-free. So that's something that a lot of our clients have begun to, embrace that. And then we're getting new clients that have these plans too. And everything from the statements and understanding can be very confusing.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, it takes guts, it takes discipline. And if they really have been listening to you guys, they're not going to touch it. They're going to let it to continue to grow tax-free. But if they need it or they want it,
yeah,
and their plan is going differently, the important thing is to hit that perfect crosshair and get that qualified distribution.
And Aaron, we have to talk about qualified distributions. We say all of the time around our office, knowledge is power.
Right.
Like knowledge is power, right?
And will you take a moment, because I think this can be very confusing for our listeners. What's the difference between a qualified distribution and a qualified rollover? Because I think sometimes people use those terms interchangeable and they're not the same thing.
No, and that's exactly where we're going with this. Like, you have to have knowledge, right? We've got to know the rules. And so let's talk about what a qualified distribution is. Mm-hmm. So this is when you want to take a distribution from your 401k, your Roth specifically, because if it's before tax dollars, those have a different set of rules. Roth 401ks have their own set of rules, and they're not the same as Roth IRA, which we'll get to in a few minutes.
Right. So one thing is like a distribution from a traditional 401k versus a distribution from a Roth 401k. There's a difference in time, right? And
time requirement. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about a qualified 401k distribution, that is a Roth, number one, it has to be held in a Roth sleeve of that 401k for at least 5 years. Okay, so You've got to meet that 5-year clock. Number two, you have to be at least 59 and a half or older.
So I'd have to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and here's the deal. People sometimes get frustrated and confused about this because they might have a Roth 401k for 10 years now and think they could take it, but the reality is they're not 59 and a half. So if you're 55, 54, 53, no, you've got to be 59 and a half or older. And here's the last one. You have to make sure that you're identifying the right basis inside your 401k. And Randy, I know you've seen some statements, and Aaron, you have too. And this could be very confusing.
Yes.
And some custodians are better about showing this than others, but you want to make sure you're taking the distributions from the right sleeve of the 401k, right? So those three components have to be met to be a qualified distribution.
Do those again. Just make sure the audience heard you.
Yeah. So number one, it's got to meet the 5-year clock. So 401ks that have the Roth sleeve, that money has to be placed for at least 5 years. Number two, you have to be 59 and a half or older. And number three, you have to identify the right basis, so the right contributions inside your 401k when you go to make that distribution.
Yeah. So let me just say something that I've noticed too, and I've seen it more than once. So we'll have a client that has made all their contributions to the Roth at their new employer plan. They've been doing it now for years. And so I've asked them, what percentage of their 401k is in Roth and what is in traditional? And they'll say, it's all in Roth. I mean, I heard you, it's all in Roth. But in reality, if the company has a match, that employer match has all been going into the pre-tax, and all the growth is pre-tax. So a lot of times, if people are just doing their contribution up to the match, that 50% of that is going to be traditional and 50% is going to be the Roth. And especially when we get further into the conversation about rollovers. So it's
Randy,
really important to identify those
so important.
Well, and if you think you're making a Roth distribution and then all of a sudden there's taxation you weren't expecting, and then again, Nick, in the reverse of this, if you've not met the criteria and it's not qualified, non-qualified, you're talking about a penalty on top of that. What a rude awakening for whatever you need that distribution for.
Yeah.
So let's say not necessarily that we need the money.
Yeah.
But it's time to be able to have some more options with investments. We want to roll it over. What kind of things are we looking at then, Nick?
Well, first of all, it sounds so easy.
Yeah.
Right. But just like in prior episodes, good plans go bad. Right. The same thing with the rollover. You mark one box incorrectly, just one box. You're talking about blowing up your Roth 401k, right? So you saved all that money to be tax-free forever, and you blow it up, right? So we have to, think about it like this: ready, aim, fire.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got to take our time to do it right.
Measure twice, cut once.
Right. The carpenter's rule.
Yeah.
Yep. So here's what we do. Number one, you have to make sure that you understand what you actually have. So Randy, to your point just a few minutes ago, right, you could look at a statement and you're thinking that you've got everything in a Roth 401k, but the employer matches have been all before tax. So in the traditional sleeve of the 401k, that's all been growing tax deferred. And if you looked at your statement and it just says tax deferred contributions, well,
doesn't mean the same thing.
It doesn't mean the same thing, right? Because a lot of people think, tax deferred. No. A Roth grows tax deferred, and before tax grows tax deferred. They both grow tax deferred. On the other side of it, one comes out taxable and one comes out tax-free. Right. So, many times we'll have our team get on the phone with clients to call the custodian to make sure that we've identified the right pieces of the 401k, because you could have multiple sleeves or pieces of the 401k. So step number one, Aaron, would be making sure that we understand what we have.
Absolutely. We see so many raised eyebrows in that conference room when we start asking what's the makeup of that 401k, and oftentimes we've got clients that had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
and Aaron, you or Randy, if you don't mind, I know you guys know this story. I believe it was a client that you guys were working on. Didn't one of your clients have a big boo-boo with a Roth 401k?
Yeah. So, one of the things that they did, the custodian, when they sent the check in, the client said that it was all traditional. And so when it was processed at the custodian, they put it all in traditional, and we caught it and said, wait, you had 401k that was Roth, and you had the traditional, and those got commingled. And fortunately, the custodian understood what we were trying to do, and we were able to undo that for the client. So you can't go by the statement. You can't go by what a client says. And that's not disrespectful to the client. But like you were saying a minute ago, carpenter's rule, measure twice, cut once. And by the way, sometimes it's at the custodian level. Some custodians, and there's a lot of them out there, especially the ones I've noticed that you can do yourself, where you can go online, log in, you put all your information in, you do the request. So people who are tech savvy, they might go in and do this themselves. And it's you could do that,
Right.
but you really want to be careful. A couple of things is notifying really what's going on, because it may not get caught at the custodian. You don't have another set of eyes on it. The second thing I've noticed, and we won't talk about this today in great detail, but some people do just enough to get the transition going, but they forget to do something like filling out a beneficiary form, which we'll talk about another day. So they've got no beneficiary because it never went past that.
And I want to stop real quick, because this is so important. You were able to help fix that for the client.
Correct.
But the reality is, had more time passed,
Right. 60.
had somebody not caught that,
Right.
the reality is that would have been something you could not undo, you could not fix, and it would have just been game over. I mean, you would have had a mess. What was that, an 8606 form you would have had to fill out on a tax return showing that you have basis in an IRA forever and ever until you deplete all of your IRAs in the future. What a nightmare.
Well, we won't go too far down here, but the other thing that people have done, and I know you've had folks who just, they, like us, we don't need any help. We know all this stuff, right? So we've had, some clients who are pretty strong-willed in that, fill out the forms themselves, and then they have a withholding on the Roth and a withholding on the IRA, and they don't have the money to make up the withholding. If they withhold 25% by checking the wrong box or not checking the right box, and they're trying to do a rollover and they do it on their own, not that people can't do it. Most of them will do it successfully, but you make a mistake in that, you've got to come up with that 25% if you want to keep the entire contributions going.
We've mentioned it several times on the podcast as well. For many, this is their largest asset.
Yeah.
Their 401k, the value is more than the home. It's more than anything else. So why not take that ready, aim, fire, wise counsel approach?
Aaron, let's just make sure, because we went through a lot of stuff right there. Let's re-identify the difference between a qualified rollover and a qualified distribution.
Yeah. So again, qualified distribution from a Roth 401k, you've got to meet the 5-year rule. You have to be 59 and a half or older, and you have to identify the right basis, the right money inside the 401k to take the distribution. Those 3 things have to be met for that qualified distribution out of the Roth 401k. So that's a distribution. Then you've got the qualified rollover, which is one, making sure that you've identified what you actually have. And that might mean, getting on the phone with your professional, your tax advisor or your financial person, right? Your financial guru. Get on the phone, make sure you really understand what's inside that 401k. Randy, as we're talking, the Secure Act 2.0 has already painted the picture that employer matches in the future could change over to the Roth side.
Right.
And by the way, for some taxpayers, it might not be an option where you get to choose.
Right.
It will just be the law that it has to go on that side. So that's really kind of a form of what I'd say is forced taxation. So while we're talking about the rules today, we do need to understand that the rules are ever changing.
That's good.
I'm going to be cynical here a little bit, but all these rule changes, what we call that in our office, job security.
Job
Exactly.
security.
Right. I knew where that was going.
How can you keep up with all this?
And we have to, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to serve our clients well. So let's go just another layer deeper. So qualified rollover. So we want to make sure we first identify, do we have after-tax dollars that are not Roth inside the 401k?
Right.
Because that can be rolled into the Roth, into a Roth IRA. Number 2, we want to identify the Roth component or the Roth sleeve of that 401k. And so you potentially have 3 different checks if you're doing a rollover, right? You could have after-tax dollars that are not Roth. You could have Roth, and you could have before-tax dollars.
Right.
So even though it just seems like you check a box and the money moves over into a rollover IRA, the reality is if you've got different types of money inside that 401k, you could have multiple checks.
Right. As a matter of fact, Nick, I just thought about this as we're talking. Some people have stayed with the same employer, as has been the history, for years, and they've watched their defined benefits plans go away, and those sometimes mean that they've got checks coming from old plans even within the same company. So they could get 4 different checks coming because of different plans that they were in, managerial plan, blue collar plan, all different kinds of things, the elimination of different plans that all became part of a 401k. And some of those had very different contribution rules. And so it really is something that you want to pay attention. And the other thing is, let's think about it. We're not trying to this is a problem with a very small percentage of people. And it's only a problem if it's you. Right? But it's enough that we're bringing it to people's attention, but we want to give you confidence. We don't want to just scare you. And all we're saying is collaborate with somebody who understands this. Your existing financial professionals, your CPA, the custodian. Right. Just don't try to do this yourself. And because how many times do you do something that's complicated perfectly the first time you do it? Why take that chance? Get some guidance on that from somebody. Make sure that you're doing it right, especially if there's complexities to the plan like we've talked about today.
And we're wanting to avoid unnecessary taxation and penalties. That's the point of this conversation.
Well, and there's, again, like a lot of stuff, there's a timeline. Once you push the button and you get some of this stuff done, you can't undo it, indefinitely. You can't catch it in April of the next year.
Yeah, right, which we have seen, right? So, Randy, when I think about rolling over successfully, this is really, this applies to both IRAs before tax 401ks as well as Roth 401ks. Sometimes marking what type of IRA is receiving it is also sometimes a challenge. I've seen where like a client has maybe marked, or a financial guru of some sort has marked traditional IRA or traditional Roth and not a rollover. And, why that might be important is ERISA allows for asset protection to go from an ERISA-sponsored plan. If it's identified as a rollover, you get to continue to carry forward that asset protection. And case law in many states is up to $5 million on a qualified plan, whereas it's up to $1 million for something like a traditional IRA. And again, that's case law, right? And that varies state to state. Right. But why would you give that up, right? Yeah. So marking the rollover instead of the traditional, that's a key thing that you've got to take into consideration. I know I'm getting in the weeds just a little bit, but sometimes those little things really do matter.
So another thing, if you don't mind, Aaron, I would just say something that we offer, and I'm sure other people do this as well, is it doesn't hurt to get on the phone with the plan sponsor and have a conversation. Again, we've done it hundreds of times, and other folks are doing it for the first time. So they get on there, they ask a question, and then the custodian gives them some feedback with another question. They can't answer it. So sometimes a three-way phone call or a collaborative phone call where we are given permission to ask those additional questions can be helpful, because sometimes it's 2 or 3 levels deep. And quite honestly, and I don't mean to be disrespectfully, but sometimes it's 2 or 3 people deep on the call center. Yeah. Sometimes you have to get to the right person there.
And Aaron, I have to hit this because it's on my head. And the thing is, this might be one of the biggest factors. So while Randy's right, we're talking about something that could impact maybe a small number of people.
Right.
This one is going to catch a lot more people. Okay. You ready? The 5-year rule.
That was next on my list. You've got the qualified distribution. Well, we didn't take from it. We rolled it over. Well, eventually we're going to want to use it. And a lot of people know, and they get that 5-year confused with the other 5-year. Please, this is another one of those things that it gets people think they know, they think they understand. We need to make sure that you and I, what I'm saying and what you're hearing, that we're on the same page. And for a lot of people, I would say that the 5-year clock is another thing that people assume and they miss it. So please lay that out on the other side.
Aaron, I work with so many financial professionals and CPAs that really struggle to get their arms around this because it is confusing. Okay. So we first have to understand we have to meet the 5-year rule if we're taking a qualified distribution out of a Roth 401k.
Correct.
Right.
And a qualified distribution is I'm taking the money out. I'm planning on spending the money.
Right.
Exactly. I'm not rolling it over. That's the wrong way to do a rollover.
Correct.
So I'm taking the money out and planning on using it.
Right. So now we're talking about rolling it over. We don't need it. We've been separated from service from our employer, and we want to open a rollover Roth IRA. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're taking from the Roth 401k, we're rolling it over directly into the rollover Roth IRA. Now, here's a boo-boo. You met the 5-year rule on the Roth 401k, but that was $1 when you did the rollover. It was $1 in a Roth IRA, traditional Roth IRA, or rollover Roth IRA. That's the first dollar. There are 2 5-year rules with Roth IRAs that you have to meet, even if you already met the 5-year rule on the Roth 401k. That's why, Aaron, we always tell people, if you're going to make a contribution to a Roth 401k, awesome, do it, fantastic.
Yeah.
But we want at least $1 to start one of those 5-year clocks that we're going to have to meet in a Roth IRA. We want to start. So here's clock number 1.
Yeah.
So with a Roth IRA, we have to have at least one contribution or one conversion from a traditional IRA to a Roth. We have to have at least $1. We've got to get the 5-year start.
Got the clock started.
To start. So there's the starting clock.
Open
that 5 years.
and funded.
With, again, $100, right? Get it started. Then until you're 59 and a half, for every contribution you make, each of those contributions have their own 5-year window. And a lot of people just think about the one that starts the clock. But then there's the additional 5-year clock for every contribution until you hit 59 and a half. Okay. Now, so let's play this out for a second. So let's say that let's say we're 56 and we start with our first $100 in a Roth IRA. We've met the criteria for the 5-year rule in the Roth 401k and we roll it over. Again, we're 56.
Right.
Okay. And we say, you know what? I've met the 5-year rule here. I started here and I get to age 59 and a half. Did I meet the 5-year rule or all the 5-year rules? No. So the one rule that we didn't meet that is so important that we didn't even really think about is the starting line. Right. So we started at 56. So that means we've got to go to 5 years.
61.
61. All right, just making sure we're all still here. All right.
We're really good at math.
You can't take a distribution from that Roth IRA until you're 61 years old.
Without penalty.
Without penalty. Now, there is an exception for basis, which we're not going to talk about right now, not for today's episode.
Right.
Okay. But if we want to take tax-free earnings out, we have to wait till we're 61 years old. Now, the second 5-year rule with that, that's kind of confusing with that Roth IRA, is per contribution that we make inside the Roth IRA. So the thing to understand there is as soon as we hit 59 and a half, that rule stops. We don't have to worry about that rule anymore. It's only when did we start the Roth IRA, that starting line. Right. So this stuff is complicated. We have to understand there's multiple 5-year rules. Okay. But as long as we meet them, again, don't be discouraged by the complexity. If you're working with someone who is, they're collaborative with you, your financial professional, your CPA, make sure those two people are talking.
Right.
That is one of the biggest benefits, I think, Randy, that we offer in our firm, I know, is that, we oftentimes are talking with our client CPAs to make sure everyone knows what's happening, right?
Yeah, so, I know we need to wrap up. I just can't help but say in an upcoming episode, one thing we need to talk about is we're talking about 2 really common things. Somebody wanting to do a qualified distribution, somebody wanting to do a qualified rollover into a rollover IRA or rollover Roth, blah, blah, blah. But what we aren't dealing with is, what if you're widowed? What if you're inheriting this? What if you're a child? What if you're a spouse? And we don't have time today, but that's a whole nother set. Why it's really important to establish, really some good backup, some good support systems, some
some
folks
good
that understand
relationships.
good relationships that understand this stuff. And today, I think a little bit like, this can be disturbing, unsettling, but it's really not going to affect a lot of people. And it's really something that can be done right. I think our job today is really to make people aware of where those obstacles are, where the landmines are, and putting together a plan and path. Just don't do this first time, never done it before, and expect that you've done it right. And some of the terminology becomes very confusing too, like qualified distribution versus qualified rollover. And, all of these inherited IRA, all this stuff can be overwhelming for certain people. And then again, you have people, it's not overwhelming for them at all. They're really cocky. They think can just do it. And we see probably more mistakes from that than we do the other.
Yeah. Well, and the penalty of a simple misstep. I mean, you
Unnecessary.
had that discipline there.
Yeah,
so again, we want to be mindful of the qualified nature of the distribution. We want to make sure that all of the 5-year clocks are covered in all the different areas and in all the different amounts. But again, what a wonderful tool. Again, we always talk about paying the tax on the seed versus paying the tax on the harvest. And man, it's if you've already started down that road, have the guts and the discipline.
Right.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Just be mindful.
We think you're on the right path doing this. Just, let's not get down to the, last yard.
Finish line, right?
Yeah.
No, that's good.
Well, and to Randy's points, there's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of complexities. Your situation may seem a little bit different. We'd love to hear from you as we prepare for that type of episode. You can email us at connect@yourretirementcoach.com. Do you want to kind of wrap us up or just, we want to end on a positive note. Like this is such a good thing.
Yeah.
And if somebody's sitting there like, I don't have that, start the clock, start that small contribution. Make sure it's an allowable amount.
And if you don't have a Roth 401k, like you're not making those contributions, investigate that.
Right.
A matter of fact, understanding tax brackets, understanding where you are now and where you're going to be at tax time. One interesting thing I've noticed is that people who really take to discipline this stuff that we're talking about through, defined contribution plans, and they really build their wealth, they're not going to be in a lower tax rate down the road. So really understanding what are the things that are going to trigger higher taxes and making sure that you've got some balance. We call it tax diversification, making sure that you don't have all your tax eggs in one basket.
Yeah. If I was to leave, our listeners and viewers today, our audience today, with one final thought, it's start. I believe, and again, everyone has their own bias. My bias is we might right now today be seeing the lowest tax rates for the rest of your life.
I'm going to cry a little bit.
If that's the case, what can you do today to really set yourself up for success in the future? Yeah. And if we're thinking about taxes today versus taxes in the future, like Aaron, you just said, would you rather pay tax on the seed or the whole harvest?
Yeah.
Let's not, neglect the fact that there have been about 4 other times in our history where the highest marginal tax rates have been this low, and we know we're just a couple of years away from going back to the old rates. So be mindful. Again, I'd encourage you, start today.
Start today. Grab the reins. Be that involved. If you're here, you're coachable. So be coachable in this moment. Start those things now. Be mindful of those clocks. Nick, Randy, this has been a great episode. I feel like, again, this just reminds people of things that they probably didn't even know they could take advantage of. I think it's funny. I'd love to hear from all the HR directors and plan sponsors that end up getting emails and calls over the next week. Hey, can I do that? Should I do that? What does that look like?
Yeah.
So anyway, again, thanks for being with us today. Any thoughts, questions, anything you want to get in front of our coaches, hit us up at connect@yourretirementcoach.com. We hope you enjoyed today's show, but you may have questions for our coaches, and they can be emailed at connect@yourretirementcoach.com. If you know someone that needs to hear this episode, we encourage you to share it. As a reminder, the content of this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as advice. On behalf of our coaches, we want to thank you for listening and for being coachable.
Yeoman's Consulting Group, a registered investment advisor YouTube channel based in Marietta, Georgia. We strive to provide comprehensive wealth management services for every stage of the journey. This platform is solely for informational purposes and is not offering advisory services or sales of securities. Investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Comments by viewers or recognitions are no guarantee of future investment outcomes and do not ensure that a viewer will experience a higher level of performance or results. Public comments posted on this site are not selected, amended, deleted, or sorted in any way. If applicable, certain editing of personal, identifiable information and misinformation may be deleted. The opinions expressed herein are as of the date of publication and are subject to revision due to changes in the market or economic conditions and may not necessarily come to pass.